This is the shocking and heartbreaking story of a Texas mother whose life was brutally taken in a twisted plot orchestrated by a mysterious suspect lurking in the shadows. On October 20th, 2020, in the town of Carrollton, 24-year-old Alyssa Burkett, a young mother and leasing agent at Greentree Apartments, was sitting in her car outside her office when horror struck. Witnesses recall seeing a man, believed to be black, approach her vehicle. Without hesitation, the man drew a gun and fired directly into the driver's side window. Alyssa was hit, but she somehow managed to climb out of her car and stagger toward the leasing office, trying desperately to reach her coworkers for help. But the attacker wasn't done. In a terrifying escalation, the suspect chased her up the stairs, tackled her, and pulled out a knife. He stabbed her a shocking 44 times, leaving her in a pool of blood just steps from safety. Moments later, the assailant fled in a Ford SUV, disappearing down the street. Despite the heroic efforts of her coworkers and first responders, Alyssa Burkett was pronounced dead shortly after. Her mother, Teresa Collard, arrived on the scene in disbelief, but through her grief, she gave police a name immediately: Andrew Beard, Alyssa's ex-boyfriend and the father of her 1-year-old daughter, Willow. At the time of Alyssa's murder, Beard and Burkett were locked in a brutal custody battle that had been growing more hostile over the months. Though Beard did not match the racial description given by eyewitnesses, investigators sensed there was more to this than met the eye. The initial lack of resemblance raised questions, but soon investigators found strange and compelling evidence tying Beard to the crime. A search of his home turned up batteries and a charger for a GPS tracking device, components that matched a tracker police had recovered from underneath Alyssa's car. Then came a discovery that flipped the case on its head. Inside Beard's SUV, investigators found 2 bottles of dark-colored theatrical makeup. It didn't take long for police to conclude that Beard had disguised himself using blackface in an effort to deceive witnesses and throw off investigators. As the investigation intensified, authorities located the abandoned getaway vehicle, a black Ford SUV, less than a mile from Beard's residence. With mounting evidence and the bizarre discovery of the makeup, Beard was arrested and charged with the murder of Alyssa Burkett. 2 years later, in 2022, he pleaded guilty, but the story was far from over. In an unexpected twist, Beard dropped a bombshell during his plea deal with federal authorities. He wasn't the one who had planned the murder. That responsibility, he claimed, lay with someone else, his new fiancée, Holly Elkins. Beard told the FBI that Elkins had not only encouraged the murder, but had masterminded it from start to finish. She had given him explicit instructions: wear the dark makeup, disguise his identity, and carry out the killing. The plan, according to Beard, had been building for months under Elkins' influence. The couple had started dating in April 2020, and things progressed quickly. By the end of that month, Elkins had already spent time with Beard and his daughter. In May, they began shopping for engagement rings, but the honeymoon phase didn't last. Elkins grew increasingly irritated by Beard's ongoing contact with Alyssa. Text messages recovered from Beard's phone revealed the toxicity brewing behind the scenes. In one message, Elkins complained, "Your BM baby mama owns you. You continue to put BM first. You choose to be, IDK, for lack of a better term, submissive to her." Her resentment was clear, and it soon evolved into something darker. Elkins allegedly began a campaign of terror against Alyssa in June 2020. What started as low-level harassment soon escalated into dangerous and manipulative actions. First, Beard and Elkins installed a GPS tracker under Alyssa's car, enabling them to monitor her movements in real time. Then came a false 911 call in July. Elkins claimed Alyssa was driving erratically on the highway. Just weeks later, she filed another false report, this time accusing Alyssa's mother of attacking her. Despite the deception, nothing stuck, so Elkins pushed even harder. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Alyssa and her new boyfriend, but the PI came up empty-handed. In September, the couple planted a gun and drugs in Alyssa's car. Beard then called police and falsely reported that she was dealing narcotics. But again, the plan failed. Frustrated and enraged, Elkins began urging Beard to take more drastic action. In their text messages, she pressured him to handle it and warned him that if he didn't act, their relationship might not survive. Around this time, Beard began searching online for how to remove gunpowder residue from his hands. They purchased items for the murder, including black rain gear, more makeup, and weaponry. The plot had taken root and was about to turn deadly. On the morning of October 20th, 2020, their plan came to life in the most horrific way. Alyssa Burkett was ambushed, shot, and then brutally stabbed to death just outside her workplace. Beard, now fully disguised, fled the scene and tried to vanish back into normalcy, but the evidence left behind, and eventually his own confession, would expose the terrible truth. Despite Beard's claims about Elkins' role, as of now, she has not been formally charged in connection with the murder. Legal experts have weighed in, debating the extent of her influence. Former domestic violence prosecutor Anthony Wu noted that while Elkins may have manipulated Beard, the ultimate responsibility still lies with him for committing the crime. "There's a lot of string pulling here," he said, "but you can't blame this on the new fiancé alone." They shared a child together, so naturally there was a custody battle brewing between them. He wanted full custody, she wanted to keep their daughter, and that placed them in a volatile tug-of-war. A scenario we've seen many times, but unlike most custody disputes, this one took a deadly turn. This wasn't just about who got more weekends or holidays. This was about control, and in the end, it led to murder. The relationship between Andrew Beard and Alyssa Burkett, the mother of his child, was far from healthy. According to legal analysts and those familiar with the case, their dynamic bore the telltale signs of domestic violence and manipulation. Alyssa had moved on with her life, building stability and seeking custody of her daughter. Meanwhile, Andrew appeared to want his version of a perfect life, a fresh start with his new fiancée and sole custody of his daughter. Alyssa was an obstacle to that dream, and he seemingly believed the only way to remove the obstacle was to erase her from the picture altogether. Leading up to her tragic death, there were warning signs that, in hindsight, should have set off alarm bells. A GPS tracker was discovered underneath Alyssa's vehicle, a chilling sign of surveillance and premeditation. Items had been tampered with or planted in her car. These weren't just red flags, they were sirens screaming that something dangerous was underway. It wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, and the stalking behavior added to the pattern of escalating intimidation. In Texas, evidence like this is legally admissible in court, especially in murder trials. These circumstantial indicators, the GPS tracker, the strange occurrences with her car, and even false police reports, collectively painted a picture of obsession and intent. All of it built a foundation to support the argument that Andrew Beard was planning something horrific long before it actually happened. Investigators, of course, had to examine the entire scope of Beard and Burkett's relationship. Although they were no longer together at the time of her death, the emotional residue of that past connection was central to the case. If there had been a history of documented abuse, arguments, or even restraining orders, those records could provide context for the final act of violence. But even in the absence of a long paper trail, digital communications and witness testimonies added weight to the prosecution's narrative. A major turning point in the case came from Beard's communications with his then-fiancée Holly Elkins. Their text exchanges were not only incriminating, they were shockingly blatant. The messages detailed logistics, suspicions, and at times intentions that left little room for doubt. These weren't vague hints or misunderstood conversations. They discussed actions, plans, timelines. When law enforcement reviewed their texts, it was as if they were reading a script to a murder plot. It's baffling to think why anyone would put something so incriminating in writing. As a defense attorney in the commentary pointed out, it's something that still boggles the mind. Why leave a digital trail of a crime? Why not just speak in person? But the sad truth is, many people assume their messages are private. They don't imagine the police combing through their phones later. They don't think ahead to trial. They operate in the moment. believing their secrets are safe within a device. But those texts turned out to be some of the most damning pieces of evidence against them. The murder itself shocked Alyssa's friends, family, and co-workers. It came out of nowhere for many of them. One moment she was showing up to work, going about her daily life. The next, she was gone. It was violent, it was deliberate, and it was personal. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone wanted her silenced, someone who knew her. That's why, in cases like this, the first person authorities often turn to is the significant other, or the ex. That old adage, "it's always the husband," didn't come from nowhere. Statistically, when a woman is murdered, it's more likely than not that the perpetrator is someone close to her, a spouse, boyfriend, or ex-partner. And in Alyssa's case, suspicion didn't take long to form. Her mother immediately pointed the finger at Andrew Beard, reportedly telling investigators she knew in her gut that he was responsible. Of course, a gut feeling isn't enough for an arrest or conviction, but it was enough to raise the first red flag. From there, investigators began pulling at every thread. They looked into Beard's prior interactions with Alyssa. They examined the vehicle that had been spotted at the crime scene, a vehicle later connected to Beard. They studied his history, and they dove deep into his relationship with his new fiancée Holly, who wasn't just aware of what was happening, but allegedly complicit in it. This wasn't a spontaneous crime. It was a deliberate act, carried out with steps and strategies in place. The evidence slowly began to build, not just physical evidence, but behavioral evidence too. The stalking, the messages, the lies told to law enforcement. It all painted a clear and disturbing picture of a man who saw the mother of his child as an enemy, not a co-parent. Someone to be eliminated, not negotiated with. As the case moved forward in court, the prosecution focused not only on the act itself, but on the many signs that led to it. They demonstrated that this wasn't just a murder. It was the culmination of months of toxic control, jealousy, and manipulation. Andrew Beard didn't just snap. He planned. He stalked. He wrote about it. He spoke about it. And ultimately, he followed through with it. This is not a crime unfamiliar to us. Sadly, we've seen it far too often, a significant other resorting to murder in the midst of a bitter custody battle. It's a tragic pattern, a warped and devastating end to a conflict that often begins with disagreements over parenting and control. What makes the case of Alyssa Burkett's murder stand out, however, is not just the brutal nature of the crime, but the chilling role of Holly Elkins, the new fiancée of Alyssa's ex, Andrew Beard. This wasn't just a one-sided act of rage. This was premeditated, calculated, and deeply unsettling. Elkins wasn't merely aware of what was happening. She was allegedly the driving force, the mastermind pulling the strings in the background. That kind of manipulation, that level of control, is what sets this case apart. The sheer audacity of it all is astonishing. For someone to be so obsessed with constructing their idea of a perfect family that they'd be willing to remove permanently the child's biological mother is almost beyond comprehension. Holly Elkins, rather than simply becoming a stepmother figure, allegedly conspired to eliminate the mother altogether. This wasn't a heated moment. This wasn't passion boiling over. This was carefully planned out and executed, all in the name of constructing a fantasy life with Andrew and his daughter, without Alyssa in the picture. From what experts have observed, while new partners in domestic situations sometimes encourage hostility or add fuel to tense co-parenting dynamics, it's rare to see it escalate to murder. And yet, that's exactly what happened here. The story of Andrew Beard and Holly Elkins wasn't just another domestic dispute gone too far. It became a full-blown conspiracy to commit murder. And if that wasn't alarming enough, the warning signs were there. It wasn't as though this storm arrived without dark clouds forming first. Before Alyssa was killed, she had reported disturbing behavior that suggested something sinister was brewing. A GPS tracker had been found on her vehicle. Andrew had previously shown up at places she was visiting without her knowledge. According to friends and recovered communications, Alyssa even feared that someone would eventually try to kill her. In one heartbreaking statement before her death, she allegedly confided that she felt Andrew's next step, after tracking her, would be to hire someone to end her life. Emotional abuse had long been part of her experience, but the level of paranoia and anxiety she expressed showed that she may have known, deep down, that things were spiraling beyond repair. When the time came, the violence Andrew unleashed was brutal. He didn't just shoot Alyssa as she exited her car in front of her workplace. As she desperately tried to flee, wounded and begging for help, he chased her down and stabbed her multiple times. It was an act of overkill, a chilling example of someone ensuring the job was done. That kind of violence isn't just about silencing someone, it's about making sure there's no coming back. It was personal, intimate, and deeply enraged, and it left behind a wake of horror, especially for the little girl who lost her mother in the most violent way imaginable. And yet, perhaps the most revealing part of this case was the digital trail left behind. Authorities obtained a trove of text messages between Andrew and Holly. These weren't vague, ambiguous exchanges. They were blatant, often referencing their desire to be free of Alyssa and discussing details that would later become relevant to the investigation. For many, the biggest mystery wasn't just the murder, it was why two people planning such a crime would leave a written record. But in many cases, those involved in conspiracies believe they are safe from consequence. They assume privacy, confidence, secrecy. They let their guard down, and in doing so, reveal who they really are. As disturbing as it is, those text messages became central to building the case. They revealed not only intent, but also premeditation, a crucial component in proving conspiracy. Andrew Beard, of course, was charged with murder, a fairly straightforward offense in Texas law, the intentional and unlawful killing of another person. But Holly Elkins faced a slightly different set of charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, stalking, and using a dangerous weapon. Even though she wasn't the one who pulled the trigger or wielded the knife, her manipulation, encouragement, and behind-the-scenes planning were enough to warrant a serious sentence. While Beard received 43 years in prison after admitting to the crime in May 2023, Elkins was hit with 2 life sentences after her arrest a month later. The severity of her punishment raised eyebrows for some. After all, Beard committed the physical act of murder. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon for more interesting videos like this.